Today marks a new part of my journey in model making, and that is to hone my skills on making moldings for the thorn. Now in the past I've made moldings, but at a much bigger scale, and that really is my challenge, is how to make moldings at the 1 in 48 scale. In the book, David and Greg suggest using old hacksaw blades or razor blades or X-Acto blades and using a Dremel tool to carve the shapes out and then using these as scrapers. I've done that in the past. The real issue is that the scale at which some of these cuts have to be made are extremely small, and I don't have a large number of high quality, very thin blades. In addition, when I started going through all my files, and I had a huge collection of files, I thought I had lots of very small files, only to find out that they too were also much too big. So I reached out to all my friends. I reached out to Greg, and I reached out to my friends on Model Ship World, and to a friend of mine who makes watches and repairs watches, and find that really they are discs that go as low as 0.009 of an inch, which is really what I would like. The only negative, if you look at the price up here, these go from a low of 15 US to a high of 45 US. And in terms of the files, there are some Swiss files that, again, for a set of, I believe, 4, they're up in the $50 and $60 range. But more importantly, they're not immediately available to me here in Trinidad. And I'm going ahead with this project now. I would particularly like to thank Tony Levine, who took the time to send me a PowerPoint presentation that she had made some time back on how to make moldings, and took you really through from the start to the finish. And I hope that when this video is done, that it will supplement in some way the work that she's done in the past in sharing this knowledge. So it's time to get into the exercise, and the first thing we need to do is we need to anneal or soften whatever it is, the scrapers that we're going to make. I'm going to use 2 sets of scrapers. One is the old hacksaw blades that everybody recommends, which really is thick and gives some substance. And the other one are these razor blades that everybody makes reference to and uses. And just to quickly take you through the process, we're going to take these hacksaw blades, heat them up to a low red, very low red glow. And then once we've reached that temperature, leave them alone to slowly cool. There are some videos that show the person dunking this in water. That works very well for gold and silver, but apparently is not recommended to be done with steel. So here we have my setup. I have a ceramic board here, a third hand to hold a piece of steel, a fire extinguisher in case anything goes wrong, and we're using this rosebud. So we'll just get that. I have to turn this on. Let's get that going. And we'll put a little bit of oxygen in it. And they suggest that you don't get it too hot. And what we do is slowly bring the steel until we get a glow. Now, one of the things they're suggesting, follow the advice, is to turn off all the lights, because in a lit room, you're not going to see the red glow. And so we just keep going up and down very slowly bringing up the entire piece until we get that red glow. What they're saying is that you don't want to overheat the piece, because then it'll get brittle. And we're using this as a scraper, so we certainly don't want the piece to be brittle. We're about a minute and a half into this, and we're starting to see a low red glow. throughout the entire piece. That's what we've been trying to achieve. We don't want it brilliant red. And again, if we turn the light on, you wouldn't be able to see that red. It'll actually disappear, and we'll probably overheat the piece. One of the key questions is, when do we reach the magic temperature? Well, there are two methods of establishing that. First, you simply put a Sharpie mark on it, and as you heat it up, once that Sharpie mark disappears, you've reached the magic temperature. The second way is, as you heat it up, when it loses all its magnetic properties, you can see it's very magnetic, it's also reached that magic temperature. So now we're just going to turn this off and let it cool. We're going to be looking at making 4 types of molding. The first one is the tuck molding. Then we're going to make the waist rail, then the 4-channel, and finally the chest tree. I decided that the best way to do this was to do it on a mill rather than trying to do it with a handheld drum mill. So the first thing we did is increase the light. I have the overhead light, I have a side light, and I even have my little magnetic light, so that there's a lot of light on the work. I've turned the mill on the side, and this is the smallest cutting wheel I have, which is, it's 0.02 of an inch, which is still a little large, but it's what I have, and it's what I'm going to make do. This cutting wheel didn't last very long. The diamond quickly wore out, so I had no cutting surface on the edge. So I had to replace and go back to my Dremel wheels, which are slightly larger, about 0.024, 0.27. So they still work fine. I will eventually get the 0.009, which is equivalent of 0.01, and that certainly would make a huge difference. There was one other modification I had to make to the mill. When I had the vise mounted down on the sliding table, I simply couldn't bring the motor down to be able to cut it. So I had to lift, and I got, for the first time, to use one of my blocks. I got some larger screws. I couldn't get hex head bolts, but this will do. This is not moving at all. These are 10 32-inch bolts that hold the work in place, and it's simple modification and really works quite well. So the straight lines will be cut using the mill and these cutting wheels, and the curves will be done with a turbo carver. I have lots of bits and pieces, diamond bits, and I'll be able to use the turbo carver. This bit that I'm using here goes down to 0.01, so that's small enough to put any curved surface on any of the scraper pieces. Then it's, how do I see the work? Well, it took a little while to realize that I would have to mount the piece in the vise, and so that I knew what I was doing, I actually have a full size copy on the piece that I'm cutting, so I can always reference back what I'm cutting. And then I'd use all these very small tools, this little square, to put a nice clean line to make sure I get the line square. And again, at this scale, I'm really struggling to get lines in place. So all I could get is the 2 edges and the large cuts, the center that, and then try and find a way to get back to the smaller shapes in the pieces. Another very useful tool is this height gauge, which allows me to set the height. And then finally, how do I see? So luckily for me, I had this old magnifying glass which I can hook up and put on the work, and I just hold it down with this so I can actually look through here and see the work very clearly. And then of course I bought this new visor. Strangely enough, I couldn't use the most powerful magnifying glass because I would have to get too close to the piece. So I'm on a 100% enlargement, but I couldn't go bigger than that. And so this is really what I will be looking at. Let's put a little light on it. And you can see the light is most important to be able to see what we're doing. And this will give you a clearer view of the work now that the magnifying glass is out of the way. One of the challenges I had earlier, I had mounted all the pieces here and thought I was going to do them one after the other. But because the wheel is so low, this piece would knock into the side of the motor. So I'm going to have to do them individually with just the little piece sticking out, and that'll be my template scraper. I'm now working on the second scraper, and I've put this little diagram which shows me in bigger scale what it is I'm making. I had put a convex curve instead of a concave curve, and I'm not sure how that happened, but it did. So this will help me when I line up the piece. Tony's method of taking a Sharpie and marking out what we want to leave on the piece is really very good. Except this Sharpie, it's the smallest I could get, still struggles, but it's enough to give me a very good guide when I put the blade inside the mill. So this is my trial piece. Of course, what I'm going to do now is to reharden this piece. And the other thing that I've realized is I need substance to hold it. So each one is going to be about this long, about 2 to 2.5 inches, which will give me substance. So when I am preparing the piece, that is enough to hold. So to reharden, we'll go through the reverse process, which is to heat it back up and then dunk it in some oil. And then we're going to put it in an oven for about an hour at, they say, between 250 and 300, which allows all the molecules, I suppose is the correct word, in the steel to realign and settle themselves in the position that they shrunk when we dunked it in the oil. Of course, the best place to do this is not in the shop, but outside in an open area. Either way, make sure you have the proper fire extinguishers to out an oil fire, which is CO2 or foam, something that will take all the oxygen away. But the best place to do this is outside. Now we're going to temper the pieces, and that's really just to stabilize the steel. And we have a small oven. So we put that up to the maximum temperature it can for up to 1 hour. And that should be enough to stabilize the piece. And then we just leave it and let it cool naturally. And now we can make as many moldings as we wish. So let's get back to the shop. Tony suggests that we push the scraper at an angle, probably around 30 degrees off, until we're almost at the correct height. And then perhaps with the last 4 or 5 scrapes, we do it straight up and down. As you start scraping these pieces, you're going to find that the blade gets quite hot and becomes an issue. So I've made up this little simple jig. It's just a piece of wood with a slot in it cut on the saw, and the blade fits inside so that you can put your 2 fingers on and it just insulates the thumbs from the heat of the blade. Very, very useful. Tony reminds us in her presentation that the choice of wood is essential to make good moldings. This is some boxwood that I purchased 8-9 years ago when I started this project. And I'd switched to juniper as the main wood, so I have lots of it left over, and it's actually making perfect moldings. That's where all these came from. The juniper is a little hard, and I actually also use some Caribbean mahogany, but that is way too soft. I know most of the advice says cut these things by hand and use a Dremel, in my case my Milwaukee, and it'll be fine. Maybe it's age, maybe it's shaky hands, but I still find the mill and the vise are just so much better and give me such more accurate cuts that I'm going to stick with making all these scrapers on the mill. One of the interesting things that came up is when you're making the scrapers, you want to try it out before you go through and reharden the steel. And that worked fine with the hacksaw blades, but with these razor blades, some of the inside pieces, which are very, very small, actually started to bend. And I had to go and reheat and harden them before I could use them. I don't think that's as important with the hacksaw blades as it is with the razor blades. So here we are a few days later, and here are the 4 moldings, all cut exactly as described in the book, all to scale, and not as frustrating as I thought it would have turned out. I have made probably, not to exaggerate, about 25 attempts at trying to get the scraper correct, but in the end I did get it, and it was more, strangely enough, it was more about my eyesight than about the tools I had. I certainly will upgrade and get the tools over time, and and try and find a way when things are this small to find a way to magnify the work so I can see it a little better. Again, I cannot thank all those who contributed and helped in my learning process on this. Join a model club, and if there's no model club in your area, certainly the Nautical Research Guild in the US is a fantastic site and source of information and source of advice. And the Ship Model World Forum allows you to show your work, show your errors, and get advice and help you along the way. And if you live in the UK, the Society of Model Shipwrights is a wonderful club. They have monthly meetings, and they put out a wonderful forum, Ships of Scale, which again will provide you with the answer and technique for many of your challenges. So we'll see you in the next video, and remember, keep modeling.